Ask the question.
Yes, I'm recording now. I'm sorry about that. That whole prologue got missed. Well, I haven't really said anything about the actual text yet. Sorry about that, all of you who are listening to the recording later. This is a question of me being less than clear this morning for whatever reason. So when we talk about the way of the Bodhisattva, so we're on the discussion of meditation, right? So the meditation has a two-part: solitude of body, solitude of mind. And we are now discussing the solitude of, excuse me, but we've discussed both of those last weekend. So this weekend, we are speaking about the meditations on relative bodhicitta. And there are the two parts: the equality of self and other, and the exchange of self and other. And I did have a thought this morning about the equality of self and other. What I was thinking is that, it's, as I said, it's not on Friday night. That's not a question of political equality or anything like that. It's not any what we normally think about equality. But what this means is that actually equality is how we are going to treat all other sentient beings, any other sentient being. So it's not a question. So it's important to bring all of these Dharma practices and to be something that's concrete in your actual own experience, your own actual practice. We don't deal with abstractions in Buddhism, really. You might think we're dealing with abstractions, but really, if you want to practice it, if you want it to be effective, then it can't be an abstraction. It has to be actually something that's connected with your practice and your experience. So that so we spoke about the equality of self and other last night. So we're speaking about the exchange of self and other. We've been speaking about that yesterday morning, yesterday afternoon. And so we will return to that today. Excuse me, and I've got to get that file open again. And in this, the exchange, talking about the exchange of self and other, the first several verses, the verses from up through verse 139, are basically speaking about the reasons why it's reasonable to actually think this way. Why do we need to consider exchanging ourselves for others? So exchanging what we mean to say when we talk about exchanging ourselves and others, so basically, as I said yesterday, exchanging self for other means that you are basically we're changing what you can't really physically change, but you're just thinking of others as being you, thinking of your own body and mind as being the other, looking at it in the other way. So we've spoken about how it all comes from habituation. We start from the habituation of seeing ourselves as being a me and as being more important because I'm me. So then we need to habituate ourselves. So up to this point, Shantideva has spoken primarily about the reasons why we should do this, why it's reasonable to think that we can do this. So then the question is, well, what do we actually have to do to exchange ourselves for others? And so we'll pick this up on verse 139, which is on page 101 of the book. Or 140, actually. And we mentioned these last night and yesterday afternoon. So I just want to start again with verse 140 to remind you of, in general, what you are doing, what we are supposed to do in the meditation. And then we can go into the specific meditations, which are kind of a fun passage. So make the inferior and so forth yourself, and make yourself the other. Then meditate without any thought on envy, rivalry, and pride. So there are 3 steps to this meditation that we're doing. These are the actual meditations of exchanging yourself and others. And so they're kind of 3 steps to this meditation. So the first is that you think of yourself as your inferior. So your inferior could be a being in a lower realm. You could think of yourself as being, remain. So I have to use a local example. A lobster. No, I don't want to be put in that pot. Why? You say you're a bodhisattva, why are you putting me in that pot? Or you can think about someone who is in a lower social position, for example, a migrant farm worker, or any other sort of person who's in a lower social position. And then you sort of look back at this body and mind. So you are basically, it's sort of like you are putting yourself in someone else's shoes and then looking at how would you see yourself. And you're looking at, in particular, how you would see this body and mind in kind of a negative way. That lobster looking out up at you is thinking, this guy says he's a bodhisattva and he's going to cook me? Come on, he's lying. He's just fibbing to himself. Right? Or the migrant farm worker says, I'm working for terrible wages, too many hours a week, and that Khenpo David is like, he doesn't even see me. He doesn't care about me at all. He says he cares about sentient beings, but what about me? Doesn't think about me, right? So that's putting yourself in the position of the lower, the inferior. So then you would put yourself in the position of your equal or your peer, someone who's on your same level. And then how are they going to look at you and say, you know, they're going to be kind of feel envious. And so look at the reasons why they might feel envious about you. Or then you put yourself in your level of a superior. And this can, of course, be a human superior, you know, someone who's got power on some level, big person in society. It could be a non-human superior. You could imagine yourself, and traditionally it sometimes talks about the examples, using the examples of the gods looking down on humans. So whatever works for you, but you put in that. And then when you look at that, you say, they think they're really something, but not really. It's just chicken shit. Just, you know, it's just nothing, right? So that is that's the basis of the meditation. So by doing this, you're kind of looking at yourself and you're kind of looking for your faults, right? You're not looking for your good parts, you're looking for your faults, because when you identify your faults, then you can fix them. That's the point. The fault is that we cling to an ego and that we therefore have all sorts of negative behaviors that come out of that. So we need to expose those faults in all of their different forms so that we can look at them. So that's the meditation. So meditating on envy. Now, the reason why I'm on the screen, I'm putting these big headings, but the reason why it's put in quotation marks in the text, this is something we can do in English that they don't do in Sanskrit or Tibetan. We have quotation marks. Sometimes Tibetans have now started using quotation marks in some editions because they see it's kind of helpful to see where is it actually speech. So you can tell there's the quotation marks at the beginning of all the stanzas. If we go to the text, each stanza has the beginning, it says a quotation mark at the beginning, and at the end of the passage, it has a close quote to tell you how far does it go. Otherwise, it's really hard to tell if you don't look at it and aren't looking at a commentary. How far is it that we're speaking about the meditation on envy? So here we begin by making the inferior you into you, and then taking your body and mind, looking at your body and mind as the other. And so this begins saying, they're respected, I am not. I do not get as much as them. They're praised while I am ridiculed, and when they're happy while I suffer. So when you're looking at the inferior, someone in a bad position. Now, in a caste society like India, this would have been someone in a low caste who has to do a menial job. And in our current society, even though we don't have an official caste system, we do have people who are in those, low positions, menial jobs, and they look, they're working really hard in order to do well. And here we all are pretty comfortable. So they're looking up and so we're respected members of the society, and they're just, cleaning the toilets, or they're doing something like that. They're not respected members of society. So they're going to look up at it and say, this body and mind is respected, but I, that is the lower sentient being, am not. So when it says they here, that's referring to this body and mind. Okay, what you normally would think of as, what you habitually think of as me, is now they. And the I refers to the inferior. So they, this body and mind, are respected, but I, the inferior, am not. I, as the inferior, don't get as much as them, this body and mind. So that's the point. You have to. This is one thing that makes this passage a little bit difficult to understand when you first go through it. You have to remember that the I and the they are switched from the way you normally think about it. Okay. I refers to what you normally think about others. They refers to the body and mind that you normally project as, that you normally use as the basis for projecting an idea of the self. So they are respected. So this body and mind are respected. I am not. I do not get as much. They're praised while I am ridiculed. So the people in the lower position, they're looked down on, they're ridiculed and all of this. And so it's a difficult position for them. And they are happy while I suffer. So they look up at us in our more comfortable looking situation. And anytime you look at someone else and they seem to be on the outside, they look like they're nice and happy. You have no idea what's actually going on. They don't know what your actual life is, but they look at it and they look like they're pretty happy. Look, they've even got time to go to meditation classes and Dharma groups. They don't have to work 3 jobs the way I do. And so they're going to look up. So looking at how do you look to others? I'm the one who does the work, but they live comfortably indeed. They're known in society as great, while it said I have no qualities. So we think the other people, the lower beings, whether they be humans of lower social status, or whether they be animals or even lower sentient beings, but they don't have any social status. We don't think of them as having any qualities, particularly when we think about a lobster. The only quality we think about lobster is the tenderness and tastiness of its flesh. So the lobster, or that other sentient being looking back at us, is going to say, no one thinks that I'm worth anything. No one thinks I'm worth anything. No qualities, what can I do? So I, as the inferior, everyone says I have no qualities, but if you look inside, actually all sentient beings have the same potential to achieve Buddhahood. Lobster, person in a lower society, a lower social status, hell being, hungry ghost, no matter who, we all have the ability to meditate and become Buddhas, or we all have the capacity or the initial, you could say, Buddha nature. They don't actually say Buddha nature in the commentaries. It's not a term that you find in Shantideva, but it's basically talking about that every sentient being has the capacity to achieve Buddhahood. And so they can be awakened. And so they have the quality, they have that incredible quality. So these people, when we look at them, we don't think they have any qualities. We don't think they're worth for anything, but they're actually potential Buddhas. And even when you get to know them, they may look like they're in a lower social class, but when you actually get to know them for example, especially with humans, it's harder to communicate with lobsters. With the humans, when you actually get to know them and talk with them, you find that actually they're probably more advanced than us in many ways. We have no way of telling from the outside, just looking. So you look at someone, you say they have no qualities. They're looking at you saying, they think I don't have anything, but they don't know me. They don't know anything about me. What can I do? I have all the qualities. I have the ability. I, as the other sentient being, have the ability to achieve achieve Buddhahood. There are some they're inferior to, and some I am superior to. So anytime you talk about a sentient being as being of a lower or a higher status, it's all dependent. So for example, this body and mind is of a certain status, and in comparison to a lobster, I'm a higher status, whatever that means. In comparison to, well, the commentaries say, in comparison to Brahma, I am of lower status. Brahma is of higher status. But in comparison to Indra, Brahma is of lower status. Or is it? No, it's the other way around. So Indra is the lower status than Brahma. I'm sorry about that. So in comparison to Indra, I'm lower status, but Indra is in lower status compared to Brahma. So every sentient being there is, there's always someone higher and there's always someone lower. So saying higher and lower is is something you can't say. So this body and mind that that says it's a bodhisattva, they're not treating me like a bodhisattva. They're not looking at my qualities. They're not looking at my capacities and so forth. So even seeing me as inferior is illusory, but that's how they see me. So that's the inferior looking back at how we are. My disciplined views and so forth are corrupted due to the afflictions. I've no control, so they should cure me as best they can. I'll take the pain. So here the inferior is saying, okay, I'm in a bad position. Why is that? It's because I don't have any control over myself because of the affliction. Because of the afflictions, I've done things that corrupt my discipline. So I haven't been able to keep as good discipline, which is why I've been born in an inferior position. I don't have as good an understanding or view and all that. So they're corrupted because of the afflictions, but I don't have control, because we have to remember that beings don't have control over their afflictions. If we did have control over our afflictions, we wouldn't be in this mess. So this body and mind, they think that they're a bodhisattva and they're going to do whatever they can to help me. Well, are they actually doing anything? If they were to do something to actually help me, I'd do it even if it hurts. Just as like if you want to go and get a COVID test, they're going to stick that thing up your nostril and twist it around and it hurts a little bit. But you do it. Or if you have a knee operation, did I say this the other day? You have a bad knee, you're going to go to knee operation, it's going to hurt. But after a few weeks, it'll be better. You're happy to do it. Then you'll say, I'm so glad that I got that knee operation. So we, as the inferiors, looking back at this body and mind, are in that position. Now you're looking at the inferiors, like, please do something to help me, even if it doesn't feel good in the short term. But I'm not something they would heal. Why do they treat me with contempt? So we forget about healing sentient beings. This body and mind doesn't even see them. We don't even look. We just people who are on lower levels, they're just completely blind to who they are. So forget about doing something to help them, to heal them of their afflictions. We don't even look at them, or if we do look at them, we're looking kind of down at them. Just give me the ticket, please. Do what I want. That's what we think, right? So instead of doing that, so if they're a person with qualities, what use are their qualities mean? So who cares if this body and mind is said to be a good person who has qualities? I'm not treating that other person. This body and mind is not treating other people that way. Treating the inferiors in that way. So they've no compassion for those inside the maws of the dread lower realms. Conceited with external virtues, they want to vie against the wise. So this body and mind says it's compassionate, but here there are people who are in the lower realms doing nothing to help them, even doing worse, actually harming them. All the insecticides and everything that we use for our gardens, even organic ones, everything that we do that harms sentient beings. We say we're going to be help sentient beings, but what are we doing? We're just harming them instead. Then we look at it and we say, oh, I'm such a good person. Or this body mind says, I'm such a good person. It's not, is it? If you're looking at it from the perspective of that other person. They want to vie against the wise. So the wise are the actual bodhisattvas. Bodhisattvas really should be trying to help people like this, and this body mind isn't doing a darn thing. So that's the passage on viewing yourself as the inferior, right? So you imagine yourself, and you can do this the way Paul describes it in the commentaries. Like you imagine yourself as, for example, he uses the example of a hell being. So now I'm the hell being, and so instead of saying Paul, I'm going to say Khenpo David. I'm the hell being now, and I'm looking. There's Khenpo David. He says he's trying to be a bodhisattva, practice to be a bodhisattva. He said, well, what's he doing for me? Nothing. Leaving me here. He's not even thinking about me. Even if he saw me, he'd do nothing for me. What good is he? He says he thinks he's so great, goes around teaching Dharma and all this stuff, but he's not done anything for me. It's looking like that. So, and you can also do this. I think that this can also be taken as like a way to think about how other people, other animals would see you and so forth, any beings you come into contact. So what I take from Paul Tsulo commentary, imagining himself as one hell being, is that you can imagine yourself as any other sentient being and look, how would this body and mind appear to that other sentient being. Think about this, really. And to really think about it. You know, we have the English expression of put yourself in someone else's shoes. This is really doing it and really looking hard at this body and mind. What are the actions that this body and mind does? What are the words it says? Do the actions and words actually accord? Or are we just full of it? Or is this body and mind just full of it? I think I'm probably just full of it. So that's the passage on imagining yourself as the inferior. And then meditate, the next part is meditating on competitiveness. So there's this one line at the beginning of the text. So this is exchanging yourself for equals or people who are your peers. And so the first line of verse 147 says, when I see those who are my peers. So you see someone who is your social, economic, whatever peer, someone on the same level as you. So it's going to be another human, similar social class, you know, wherever you are. How's that person going to take? You imagine yourself as that other person looking back at this body and mind. And what that other person, and so you're as the peer looking back, you say, I want to be better than this body and mind. They think they've got it made, but you know, I better get ahead of them somehow. What can I do to make myself superior, to make myself the sentient, the sentient beings who are equal, make myself sentient being? I'll get there, that is this body and mind's things. So I need to do what I can to get as much as I can out of this body and mind. What can I do to get something out of this body and mind and gain respect, even if I must fight for it? No matter what I have to do something to get something from the center. They say that they're going to be, this body and mind says that it's going to be willing to do anything to help sentient beings. Well, let's see if they really are. Let's see, they're willing to be generous. Let's see how generous they're willing to be. Can I get something out of them? Right? So I'll get their things and gain respect. They say that they want to be modest and help other sentient beings and become in good position. Well, let's see if they're willing to do it for me, this body and mind. No matter what, I'll make it so my qualities are world renowned. I'll make sure no one ever hears of any of their qualities. So you as the peer, so basically you're imagining yourself as another human. And you're looking back at this body and mind, say, well, I want to make sure that people know all about my good qualities and people know everything good about me, and then make sure that no one hears anything good about this body and mind, right? So imagining yourself as the other and doing this. Now this actually comes up to a really important point that the Gyalwang Karmapa often brings up. And that is that when you look at other sentient beings, normally when we see another sentient being, the first thing, we almost never see any of their qualities. And the reason for this is that for sentient beings, qualities are like really fleeting. They're there for a moment, here today, gone tomorrow. They're just a moment. It's like a lightning flash. There's a brief bit of quality of like love and compassion and so forth. And then almost immediately it's covered up by greed, hatred, desire, jealousy, feelings of inadequacy, laziness, whatever. So your afflicted ideas then immediately cover up all of your qualities. So the qualities are very brief. So when you see another sentient being and you see a quality in a sentient being, you should celebrate it as being like rarer than a Buddha. You should see it as being incredibly valuable. And make sure that no one ever hears any of your qualities, so, as it says in the second line here. So we often try to do everything to make our qualities big. But what happens when we try to let other people know about our qualities? We get proud, we get conceited and arrogant. And that doesn't help anyone. So you just don't speak about, well, this Holiness shouldn't say this, but anytime you say qualities in another sentient being, you should celebrate them as if you have seen a Buddha, as being more rare than a Buddha. This is actually something that the 8th Karmapa Mikyu Dorje said. So this is a very important point. And so here in the text, Shantideva is speaking about this in terms of putting yourself in the shoes of your peer and looking back at this body and mind. So you as the peer is thinking, I'm going to make that is the peer's qualities world renowned. Let everyone know about them. And I'll make sure no one ever hears about this body and mind's qualities. right? So you are there. So you're now therefore never going to try to let anyone know anything about any qualities in this body and mind. Furthermore, I will hide my faults so I am honored and they are not. Now I'll easily get goods and be respected. They will not. When they act inappropriately, I'll watch for a long time with glee. I will make them a laughing stock that all revile amongst themselves. So at the same time as you, now the peer, the sentient being who is the peer, looking back at this body and mind, says, I'm going to hide my faults. My here being the other sentient being's faults. Never, no, I'm not going to let anyone know of any of my faults. So that I get the honors, I'm respected, I am treated well in society. Let this body and mind now be just totally reviled, and let everyone laugh at them. Basically, be a laughing stock that everyone reviles. This is so this is doing it in terms of exchanging yourself and other. So in practice, so this is the meditation that you do. Then in practice, when you're also going out about and seeing people, in addition to when you see people's qualities, actually, I mean, to put it in a contemporary way, to appreciate people's qualities, to recognize and appreciate people's qualities when you see them, because they're pretty rare. And then when you see other people have faults, instead of thinking that those sentient beings have faults, this is no longer exchanging yourself for other. This is when after you've gotten up for that, the way you apply it in your daily life. You see other sentient beings have faults, then you don't bring those faults out. You don't speak about them. Instead, you think that they're your faults, that you're projecting on another sentient being. You don't see other sentient beings as having faults. If you do, you assume that it's just your own projection about the other sentient being, so that you do everything so that they can be well treated, so they can easily get goods, they can easily earn money or do whatever they did. Back in ancient India, it was a lot of barter and exchange. So people would be given, like, especially if they're monastics, they would be given, food and clothing and so forth. So you want to make it so that other sentient beings will be able to get the food and clothing, even if it costs yourself. They will, and so that that is this body and mind, will not. So that's exchanging yourself with a peer. So again, you can do this either as kind of like you can imagine yourself as a specific person looking back at this body and mind, or you can think of yourself as like a general sort of person in a similar class as yourself looking back at this body and mind. And meditating on competitiveness. Now here, when we're thinking about these meditations on self and other, exchanging oneself for others, first with the envy and now with the competitiveness. Envy and competitiveness are afflictions, right? But here we're using what looks like the afflictions as actually an antidote for the actual afflictions. So when you are turning those afflictions on their head and looking back at this body and mind that you normally project as being me or mine, when you turn them on their head, then they become antidotes for those same afflictions that you actually have and for your other afflictions. So this is an important point. They seem like they're afflictions, but they're not. They're the antidotes for the afflictions. It's kind of like in the 7th chapter, we had the meditations on pride as a way to overcome pride, the meditation on the pride of confidence as a way to overcome the pride of arrogance. So it is similar here in this chapter. So to return to the text, so the next stanza, now it is not actually marked, is the stanza on meditating on pride. So exchanging yourself for your superiors. And this begins on 151, and the only clue you have in the text is that it's the closed quotation marks at the end of 150, which of course you don't have in Sanskrit or Tibetan. We're lucky we have it in English. This wretch is trying to rival me, it said, but can they be my equal in learning or intelligence, in body, stature, or in wealth? So now you imagine yourself as the superior to this body and mind. So you think, who is my superior? And this is, I mean, you could think about someone like or I just said, I don't think we're thinking about someone like the Karmapa or the Dalai Lama or the Buddha or something like that. I think we're thinking about someone who's world superior on a worldly ways. So you might think of yourself as an ex-president, looking down at this body and mind. This just trying to rival me. Here I am, I'm the ex-president. And look at them. Maybe I'm the current president. Looking down at this body and it's trying to rival me. It's said, but can they be my equal in learning or intelligence? Everyone knows how intelligent I am. I'm really intelligent. I'm so smart. Look at them, this body and mind. So I here is the superior, and they is referring to this body and mind, and body, stature, or in wealth. When they hear of my qualities that are well known to everyone, so everyone knows of me as a superior, as the ex-president, for example, everyone knows that I'm great and everyone loves me, and everyone knows that I have the qualities. Everyone always likes them, so that they, that is this body and mind, experience the rapture of feeling shivers of delight. Although they might possess some wealth, we'll take it all away by force. And if they can't do some work for us, we'll give them just enough to live. So now you're imagining, as you as a superior, looking at this measly body and mind. Well, let's put them to work. They're my inferior. I'm going to put them to work. I'm going to take all their force, their wealth, everything that they own away by force if I have to, put them to work for me, because I'm the superior now. And this body and mind, they're being superior. And so they're going to put them, this body and mind, to work for the superior. We'll give them just enough to live. We will deprive them of happiness and always yoke them to our torments. This one wrought miseries for us hundreds of times in all samsara. So it doesn't matter if this body or mind is happy or not. We now, as seeing ourselves as the superior, say, I'm going to make them work for me to make me happy. Make me comfortable, make me feel good, make me, give me the benefit of happiness, even if it costs them any of their worldly happiness. And we'll always yoke them to our torments, make them basically, put them to work for us. This one wrought miseries for us hundreds of times in all samsara. So this body and mind, I've caused this body and mind and have caused problems for all sentient beings, including our superiors, hundreds or infinite numbers of times in all of samsara, because we've had an infinite number of births and we've done an infinite number of misdeeds to all sentient beings, including those who are our superiors in this lifetime. So that's what this line is saying. Now, these two lines are sometimes interpreted differently. And so when I was translating this, it was actually an interesting translation question. There are some commentaries that have the section on exchanging the superior for the other ending at the end of the second line. So, and always yoke them to our torments, and then there would be a closed quotation mark there. This one wrought miseries for us hundreds of times in all samsara. This one would then refer to your ego clinging. So it's another interpretation of this line. So it's, of course, when you're translating something, you have to you can't be as ambiguous as the Sanskrit. We have to put so there's the advantage of putting in the closed quotation marks of showing clearly where things end, but then you have to decide, and sometimes it's ambiguous. So it could be interpreted separately, that this ego thing wrought miseries for us, for all sentient beings, hundreds of times in all samsara. So that's another valid interpretation of those last two lines. So those are the three meditations on exchanging yourself for self and others. So basically, to wrap it up, what you do is you are putting yourself in the other person's, in the other being's position. Now, for us as humans, it's easiest, and particularly for us as humans in our current society, it's easiest for us to imagine ourselves as other humans, right? But we should also consider imagining ourselves as like animals. That's a little bit easier, or as hungry ghosts or so forth, looking at imagining yourself in the position of those beings in the other realm. So if they saw someone like you, how would they look at you? If when an animal looks at you, how do they see you? So you put yourself in their position. And it's the main point of all this is that we have to overcome our ego clinging. So the point is that we're not actually trying to do anything harmful for ourselves. We're not trying to harm me. What we're not trying to be what do we say? The main object of these meditations is that they are to counteract our ego clinging. This is an important point because sometimes we kind of mistake what we're talking about. For example, in the Lojong slogans, there's one slogan that is often misinterpreted. Sometimes it's translated as drive all blames into one. Or we could also translate it, all blames come down to one thing. It all comes down to one thing. So people read this and they think, all blames, it's me who's to blame for everything. Me, me, me. And so in our Western society, we have a habit of guilt, which is it's not an Asian habit, really. I mean, you can feel regret and guilt are different. They do feel regret for things, but guilt is a peculiarly Western, peculiarly European, what do we say, mental factor or combination of mental factors. So when you say drive all brings into drive all blame into one, or all blame comes down to one thing, that one thing does not refer to what you usually project as being yourself. Instead, it comes down to your ego clinging. Ego clinging is different than what you project as the ego clinging. So there's nothing inherently wrong with your body or the mental factors or the consciousness. And of course, the idea of a me that you project based on those is a fiction, but there's not necessarily anything wrong with that in terms of operating in the relative world. Even Buddhas, even sentient beings or even those great beings who have realized emptiness, operate on a relative level with an understanding of the way beings project a self based upon their 5 aggregates. So if that's it, that's not what we're talking about. It's the habit of ego cling that we are to overcome. So as I spoke about a moment ago, the meditations on pride, envy, and rivalry or competitiveness, those 3 are afflictions. They're all what we call secondary or near afflictions. So in general, they are afflictions, but here we're using them as antidotes for our own afflictions. For example, when you meditate upon envy, so you exchange yourself for your inferior and you meditate upon envy for this body and mind as someone superior, you are meditating, this meditation counteracts the ego clinging to this body and mind, and it also counteracts your pride. When you meditate on envy or on competitiveness, you exchange yourself for your peers. You see the peers as me and this body and mind as the other, and meditate on competitiveness. This also acts as a antidote for the competitiveness within this body and mind, within its continuum, right? Then when you exchange yourself for your superior and you look down on this body and mind, you meditate upon on pride or on contempt and scorn for this body and mind, that is acting as an antidote for your envy, and so forth. So these are acting as antidotes for the afflictions, but the main thing that they're doing is they're acting as an antidote for your ego clinging. It does this in 2 ways. The one is by you're putting yourself in another being's shoes and looking back, and so you're able to see your faults more clearly if you are honest with yourself. And it also just weakens because you get used to seeing other people as me, right? So these are meditating on exchange of self and other, when you're actually exchanging the locus of your ego clinging for another sentient being. But there are other ways to meditate upon this, on the exchanging self for other, as I mentioned. For example, we spoke about Tonglen the other day. But in the next passage, Shantideva then begins to look at it from the perspective of, instead of looking at the me as being what you cling to as being me, your ego clinging, instead, you look at the me as being the antidote aspect of your mind. part that sees. In other words, to put it another way, sometimes the Gyalwang Karmapa describes if you've got it's like you have two people on your shoulders, one on either side. One's the good guy, one's the bad guy. And they're both giving you advice. You got to listen to the good guy and not to the bad guy. Or you could, what we always, I don't know, I haven't seen this for a while, but I live in the equivalent of a cave. No, it's not really a cave, but it's not even the equivalent of a cave. I got too much food, and too much. But anyways, but I live in a little bit of isolation. So, but we have like the guardian angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other. Who are you going to listen to? So you put yourself in the position of the guardian angel, and you're going to give that devil a talking to. So you're taking the position yourself of your better nature, shall we say, or of the antidote to ego clinging, and now you're giving the ego clinging a talking to. And so this starts in the next verse. O mind, you have spent countless eons wanting to benefit yourself, but even with such great ordeal, you've only created suffering. So mind here refers to the ego clinging mind. So here, the narrator who's speaking to that is your antidote mind saying, or your guardian angel looking at this and saying, oh mind, you want to help yourself, but you don't know how, and as a result, you create suffering for yourself, no matter how hard you work for it. Therefore, you must apply yourself completely to benefiting others. Later, you'll see the merits in this. The sage's words are undeceiving. So now this mind that's filled with the afflictions, your habit is to cling to ego. But what you have to do now is you have to, instead of trying to help yourself, you need to try to work as much as you can to benefit others. If you do this, you'll see the good. You'll see the good that will come from it. And this is what the Buddha taught. And his words are undeceiving. They are factual. If you had done these acts before, a situation such as this, that's not the Buddha's perfect bliss, would never have been possible. So you afflicted mind, if you had only listened before when all those Buddhas of the past taught it, or any time any other Dharma teacher, someone in any of your past lives, if you had listened in the past and actually done as they said, you'd be a Buddha, you'd be happy. It would have been impossible for you to be in this, wretched situation that we're in now. If we, as I said the other day, I think I say this all the time, it's probably one of my stock things that I say, if we at the same time, because back when the Buddha Shakyamuni first roused bodhicitta, 3 uncountable eons ago, if we had roused bodhicitta at the same time, we'd be Buddhas too. The Buddha roused bodhicitta, worked on it, and because of that, look at what happened to the Buddha. He became a Buddha. And look at what's happened to us. Therefore, just as you have clung to drops of others' sperm and blood as being yourself, likewise you must meditate thus for others too. So we need to meditate on seeing others as being me, others as being, and so when you talk about what we're saying, by seeing others as being me, seeing others as being the people we cherish more than anyone else. Normally, me and mine are the ones that things that I cherish most. Instead, we need to see others. The sperm and the ovum at the moment of conception are not us. They're other than us. We just cling to them. In the same way, through habituation, we can cling to others, as we discussed yesterday. You should act as a spy for others. When you see anything on your body, take away that very thing and use it to benefit other beings. So no matter what you have in your body, we can also talk about in your kitchen drawers, in your safety deposit box, in no matter what. Instead of using all of these things that we have for ourselves, you should take it, instead of using it for this body and mind, use it for the sake of all other sentient beings. And you should be a spy, looking out, when is this body and mind getting ready to do something selfish? When it's getting ready to do something selfish, you got to step in and stop it and say, hey, don't do that. You've got to use it for the benefit of others. So here, again, this is your guardian angel giving your ego clinging talking to. This is what you got to do. It's still kind of a gentle one. It's like good advice, you know. You got to listen. If you want to be happy, you got to do what I say, right? I'm comfortable, others are not. I'm high in stature, others are low. And I am helped by others are not. Why aren't you envious of yourself? This is talking about me. It certainly is. You might sometimes, you know, sometimes you read something. This is talking about me. I'm very comfortable. There are lots of people who aren't. And I don't do nearly as much as I could to help them. I'm high in stature. I mean, people look up at me. Everyone sees my name on the internet and it's like, what? Others are, you know, no one knows about anyone else's name, you know, lots of other people. And I'm always helped. Everywhere I go, people are always, I really should be jealous of myself. Deprive yourself of happiness, take others' suffering on yourself. When you think, what is this one doing? Examine your own deficiency. This one being this body and mind. What's it doing? You should look. You should always look to see what your own faults are. Now, looking to see what your own faults are is different than beating up yourself. It's not a question of looking at and saying, oh, poor me, I'm such a horrible person. Saying, how can I improve? What can I do that's better? How can I make myself a better person? This is what we have to do. You have to start by making yourself a better person. And in order to make yourself a better person, you have to know how you are inadequate, what you are not good at, what you are doing wrong. You have to be able to see and admit to yourself that, yes, I'm being selfish. I'm perfectly happy to spend money on myself without thinking, without even a thought, and but the thought of giving someone else is like, oh, should I give this person $10? I'm happy to go off and spend $10 on something that's just totally frivolous. Especially if they accept, you know, tap payments. Like, yeah, tap, it's gone. Who knows? Deprive yourself of happiness, take others' suffering on yourself. When you think, okay, I've already been through that, examine your own deficiencies. Even the wrongs that others do must be transformed into your own faults. Even the minor wrongs you do must be confessed to many people. So when you look at yourself, and you see, when you see other people doing wrong things, you should understand that these are your fault. These are your problem. This is your own ego clinging. All blame comes down to one thing: ego clinging. That one ego clinging. So in a sense, they're your own faults. When we look, and usually when you look at another sentient being and you see them doing something that seems like it's a bad thing to do, or seems like a fault, or seems something, when you see some inadequacy in another being, almost always you're actually seeing your own fault reflected in that other being. When you think someone else isn't being nice enough, it's not generally that. It's actually that you are expecting more than you should. You have an unreasonable expectation. It's your problem, really. So if you begin to look at other sentient beings and always look for the positive, look for the good in other sentient beings, and whenever you have faults, you need to be brutally honest with yourself and other people about your faults. Now here it says that the minor wrongs that you do must be confessed to many people. There are different approaches to this. Some people take this literally. In the Tibetan tradition, they often think about this in terms of doing confession practices. Like you imagine doing the 35 Buddha practice, where you imagine the 35 Buddhas in front of you and you make your confessions to them. Or if you're doing Vajrasattva practice, you imagine Vajrasattva and all of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. You imagine that you're confessing and admitting all your downfalls and wrongs to them. In the Tibetan culture, they're not very good at actually admitting their faults, directly confessing. In our culture, we tend to be a little bit more confessional. We tend to think about things, but you have to be careful when you are confessing your faults, when you're admitting your faults to other people, because sometimes we say it becomes almost like an exercise in ego. Oh, I'm such a horrible person. Look at me, I'm a horrible person. If that's what you're doing, then that's acting out of ego. So you've got to, the point is not to make a big thing of your faults. It's not to go on some daytime talk show. The point is to be honest with yourself so that you can be a better person. And especially when other people criticize you. Criticism is extremely useful, far more useful than any praise. Now other people, don't know this, and they can't accept criticism very easily. So you should never criticize other people unless you can do it in a very gentle way that they can hear, or unless you can do it in a way that they can hear, then will help them, which might be, might be a little bit harsh on the outside, but it's rare for us to be able to do that. When other people criticize us, it is extremely helpful, and you should be delighted when people criticize you because they're showing you your faults. Even if you think they might not be 100% true, chances are they're at least 10% true. And don't you want to know that 10% that's a fault? And so actually, so other people criticizing you is probably incredibly helpful for you. Proclaim especially others' fame so that it will outshine your own. Employ yourself to all their ends as if you were the lowest slave. So always taking the lowest position. This is as it's said in the 8 verses of Training the Mind by Geshe Langri Thampa. And I don't remember the stanza off the top of my head except the last line. So to always take the lowest position. So you always elevate other people and always sit in Tibetan society, it's sitting in the back, not making a big deal of yourself, being in a low position, trying to be humble. And if you do this, then things will work out. If you let yourself sit in the high position, if you make sure that you want to sit in the front on the highest seat where everyone can see you, then you're just going to be inflating your pride. So it's best to use yourself, to put yourself in a humble position and always do anything you can to help others. This one is rife with faults by nature, this ego clinging. Is rife with faults by nature. So do not praise their fleeting virtues. Do all you can so no one knows anything of their qualities. So you here are the guardian angel, or the good part of your mind, the antidote mind. They is talking about this one is your ego clinging. So ego clinging, just by its very nature, is a fault. So even if there seems like some good thing about the ego clinging, don't praise it, and don't build it up. In brief, for your own selfish sake, you have caused injuries to others. So now make it so for being sake that all harm will fall on you. So you want to trade yourself for others, exchange yourself for others. Now here, comes down to the point of habituation. This is why we do Tonglen meditation, so that we can, when you're actually doing Tonglen meditation, right, you're imagining that you are breathing in all of the pain and suffering of all of the sentient beings and all the causes of pain and suffering, and that you're breathing out everything good of your own so that they become Buddhas, as we discussed yesterday, right? Of course, there are different variations on the Tonglen meditation. There are different variations on it. But basically what you're doing when you're doing that Tonglen meditation is you are training yourself for this very verse, because you're training yourself in visualizing taking the suffering on others and giving them your happiness. Now, when you're doing Tonglen meditation, it's not like it's actually happening, right? Generally, for us as beginners, there are stories of great masters who have perfected Tonglen meditation who are actually able to take suffering. But those are exceptional stories. For us right now as beginners, we're not actually doing that. On the other hand, what we're doing is we're doing the visualization and the habituation. And the visualization of doing this is incredibly important. A couple of weeks ago, Khenpo David Karma Choephel came to Vancouver, and I had the excellent fortune to go to one of his talks, and also he came to our monastery and gave an empowerment there. And one of the things he spoke about was, in particular with regards to visualization practice, that when you visualize and imagine something, it's a way of training your mind to do it. So he was speaking in the context of deity meditation, but it also applies to Tonglen, because Tonglen is imagining something. So what Mingyur Rinpoche said, it's kind of like an athlete before they do their athletic event. They visualize themselves doing it, right? And then they've rehearsed it in their mind, and it's almost as good as training and doing it. So by rehearsing this in our minds over and over again, with every breath we take when we're doing the Tonglen meditation, or all the time if you can maintain it continuously, then you're training yourself into doing it. Now, while you're training, you aren't doing it. For example, there is the skier standing up on the top of the incredibly steep ski hill. It doesn't look so steep on TV as it looks when you're there in person. They're standing up there, and of course they're used to it, so they're not scared at all. They're looking, and they are imagining the run. They are imagining how they're going to do each little move as they go all the way down the run. It's like an extra practice run happening right here in their head. And then they go. And because they've rehearsed that run in their head dozens of times, when they get to that point, they know exactly how much pressure to give with their heel, what to do with this, how much angle to put on the blades so that they don't wipe out, usually. Of course, when we're watching on TV, we really want them to wipe out because those are the most fun parts. But because we don't practice mind training when we're watching sports. It's like, yeah, we want to see that car crash in the F1 race. It wouldn't be nearly as popular if there weren't car crashes or if the skiers didn't crash right. So I got myself distracted. So you visualize taking this on over and over again, visualize giving all your happiness away, taking all the suffering away, so that when you actually get into position where you have an opportunity to do it, you're ready. If you don't visualize it beforehand and you get to a position where you could help someone else, but you have never thought of doing it, you're gonna like, oh, wait a minute, what am I supposed to do? Didn't I read about that in that, what was that book called? Entering the way of the, what was it? Oh yeah, the way of the Bodhisattva. It taught about something. What am I supposed to do? Well, all the time you're thinking about this, your opportunity to actually do the help is gone. You can't help them because you're too busy thinking, where did I read that? Who is the author of that book? And what am I supposed to do? I don't remember. Let's see. I got a better get. Oh, I've been going on quite a while. How far have we got? Ah, yes, just one more verse to go through. So don't let this one be impetuous and arrogant and headstrong ways. Instead, leave it like a new bride who's shy and fearful and restrained. Now, this is another difficult verse for us in this day and age. So we got to unpack it a little bit. So generally, this one means our ego clinging. It's impetuous, it's arrogant, it's headstrong, it's going to do whatever it wants. Instead of being like that, we should be like a new bride in a traditional Indian household in the middle of the first millennium. So this is a context where a girl who is probably 12, 13, or 14 is married off. She has no idea who she's being married to. Her parents have arranged it. They come with a big procession and they take her back. If they're rich, they carry her on an elephant. If not, she has to walk. She goes to the new household. And when she's in the new household, she is the lowest on the totem pole. And she's a kid. She's like 12, 13, 14 years old. So how is this kid going to feel in this position where everyone is like looking down her and she's like the new bride? So how is she going to be? She's going to be shy. She's going to be fearful and restrained. So in the same way, we need to make sure that our own minds are also shy, fearful, and restrained. But we have to be shy of doing any misdeeds, of doing any bad karma, committing any bad karma. What we have to be fearful about is we have to be fearful about falling into the lower realms. And we need to be restrained in that we need to take control of our own actions of body, speech, and mind. So we have to have these qualities of, basically the qualities of a conscience, the qualities of fear of the lower realms, and the qualities of taking control of our of our mind. So here, this is an ancient Indian example. If you imagine yourself not in 21st century America, but in the context of, first millennium India, how would you feel if you had just been sent off and brought to this family? You're the smallest one physically, and you're in this terrifying position. How are you going to feel? So that's the analogy. And so what we're saying here is that you have to have these qualities of being, having a conscience, being fearful of the lower realms, and restraining your actions of body and speech. So that is enough on that for this morning. There's one thing I would like to speak about now, which is yesterday we had the question about what is the object of the eighth consciousness. If it's a momentary consciousness that has an object, what is the object? And I brought up the quotation from the 30 verses by Vasubandhu, but I explained it a little bit incorrectly. I remembered half of the explanation and got some of the words confused. So I want to now clarify this. So when we are talking about the object of the eighth consciousness, what it is it's an unrecognized awareness of grasping in place. This is what Vasubandhu says. So it's an unrecognized awareness. You don't realize that you're having this because it's a very subtle awareness. And what you're aware of are two things: grasping in place. So the grasping refers to, yesterday I said it refers to our ego clinging and grasping. In particular, what it refers to is our grasping, or is the imprints of grasping in our being. So the tendencies or imprints of grasping that we have in our being. So that's what the grasping refers to. And place yesterday I described as referring to the 6 classes of samsara. That was incorrect. The 6 classes of samsara, another quality. One of the names of the eighth consciousness is that it's called the ripening consciousness, and that it ripens as the 6 realms of samsara. But that is a different thing than is meant here by the term place. So place in particular means body, and by extension, it means the 5 aggregates. So what we're saying is that the object of the eighth consciousness, there are 2 objects. The first is the subtle imprints or seeds of ego clinging. That's the first. And the second thing, it is an unrecognized awareness of the 5 aggregates, the place. And when we say it's an unrecognized awareness, it's like what we're saying is that there is no awareness of thinking, this is that. This is that. There's none of that. So it's not recognized. It's a subtle awareness. So I just wanted to clarify that, what it is. So basically it's the 2 things it's attached to are the imprints of ego clinging and to the 5 aggregates, which are referred to as the place. And it is, maybe we have time for one question this morning before we break for lunch. Is that fair? Do we have any questions this morning, or have we just overwhelmed everyone? Yes, Jan has a question.
I'm wondering how to reconcile exchanging oneself for the other or others with, the Western psychology sort of guidance to keep healthy boundaries. So there's a definition between self and other. So in other words, the idea is to protect oneself. It's a protective measure. Mm-hmm. And I look at it more as protecting stability than ego clinging. In other words, if something destabilizes me through my interaction with the person, I might not be in a very good position to help them or help them, help us both.
Right. Yeah. So the question for those of you listening online, if you are unable to hear, the question is, how do we reconcile the teachings on exchanging oneself for others with the Western teachings on Western psychology idea about having boundaries for yourself? So protecting yourself a certain amount, protecting your ability to help others and so forth, not going too far. In other words, protecting yourself from burnout and so forth. So there are a couple of points here. The first thing is that when you were practicing the exchanging self for others, you were doing it in meditation. It's not actually an instance where anyone else can actually take advantage of you. So it's meditation. That's a big difference. So when you're in an actual position of actually working with other people, you have to look at your own level. The actual point. You have to see what you are able to do. It's important not to do things that you are going to later regret. I went too far. But You also have to remember you probably have a greater capacity than you think. So the question is, well, what is it that means, when you feel like you have to protect yourself? It's like all a question about how much attachment you have to yourself. Because if you no longer feel like yourself is worth protecting, you really truly feel that, then it's going to be a matter. So this comes to a question of, again, being honest with yourself. When you say that, oh yes, I don't like my ego thing, I don't want to cling to myself, ego clinging is bad, you have to look at how much of that is an intellectual understanding and how much of it is a gut understanding. So you have to come to the point where you really understand it. So this is, to begin with, it's you have to go through all the preliminary stages of the four thoughts that turn the mind and so forth in order to overcome the basic things, that we cling to as being me, and the attachments that we have to being permanent, the idea that there is happiness and so forth, and samsara and all that. If you have really internalized the four thoughts that turn the mind, then you're not going to care what happens in this lifetime. And if you no longer care about what happens in this lifetime, truly, and not just on an intellectual level, if you no longer care for it truly, then you're going to be able to say whatever. And when you can say whatever, then no matter what happens to you, it's going to be fine. But you have to meditate to get there. So this is why you have to work on the preliminaries. It's also why we have to go through the steps of gaining solitude of body and mind, even in the context of our daily lives, of overcoming the things that we're attached to. Because the reason why we need boundaries is because we have not overcome our attachment. The Buddhas do not have boundaries. They don't need boundaries. So we're ordinary sentient beings. So when you are doing this in practice, you have to be careful for where you actually are. When you are meditating, then you visualize yourself doing as much as you can. And that then has the practical aspect that your capacity will increase. Again, you're like that skier imagining the run a dozen times before you actually have to do it.
Earlier when you said, be kind but keep your distance, does that have any relationship to this?
Okay, so that's earlier in the chapter, we were talking about the solitude of body and mind. So be kind but keep your distance, or be kind of dispassionate, don't be too attached to other people when you interact with them. So when you see other people, instead of putting your hopes and fears on them, instead of being too nice to them, and therefore getting some sort of a hope that they're going to treat you nicely, instead of doing that, you keep your distance a little bit. Because when we are, especially when we're beginners, when you're too nice to people, you still hope for the eight worldly dharmas. So it's going against the eight worldly dharmas. In other words, the less attachment you have to the eight worldly concerns, the better you will be able to exchange yourself for others in all situations, until you get to the point. So when you know that you've trained yourself in exchanging self for others, is when terrible things happen, or when something terrible happens to you instead of someone else, and you are happy about it. Thank God it wasn't the other person. We're really, really able to feel that, then that's when you've really trained. Okay, so we will resume again at 2 p.m. this afternoon. And that means that right now we have to do the dedication prayer. 1 second. O sanam de tam che se bani tom ne beranam pam che ne Kegana Chingala Chubai Sibeto Nero By this merit may we attain omniscience defeat the enemy, wrongdoing and free, all wanderers from the ocean of existence, churned by great waves of birth, age, sickness, and death. Okay, thank you very much.